I am employed at a small cemetery, located on the outskirts of my town, occupying just a few acres of land. I had been working there for about a year, and while it wasn't the cemetery itself that bothered me, I found the job incredibly dull. Throughout the nights, I was all alone, confined to a small room, and had to monitor 3 cameras placed around the yard and entrance. My boss's instructions were simple. My presence was merely a deterrent, and in case of any actual issues, I was to contact the police for assistance. However, during the whole year of working there, nothing remotely unusual or exciting occurred. Given the small size of the cemetery and the town, such incidents were unlikely. One Monday evening, after taking over the night shift from my co-worker, I felt quite drowsy due to lack of sleep. In an attempt to stay awake, I sipped on coffee while watching the camera feeds and occasionally using my phone. Around 1 a.m., my drowsiness got the best of me, and I must have dozed off for about 20 minutes. Upon waking, I heard a strange sound. The metal door of my building was partially open, swaying in the wind. This startled me, and I quickly investigated, but there was no one in sight. Although I tried to rationalize it as a simple oversight, I couldn't shake off the uneasy feeling. From that moment on, I remained vigilant and constantly checked the cameras. About 10 minutes later, I noticed movement on one of the screens. A man was walking through the cemetery, and this trespasser stopped between some gravestones. Not taking any chances, I immediately dialed 911 while keeping my eyes fixed on the screen. As I informed the operator about the situation, the man suddenly sprinted through the yard and off the screen. He reappeared on different cameras, making it seem like he was deliberately avoiding being captured by them. I decided to be quiet as he approached the building, where I was stationed. He looked directly at the camera, giving me an eerie sensation that he could somehow see me through it. The man asked for help, but I remained silent, unsure of his intentions. He then went to the back of the building, and although there were no cameras there, I could hear his footsteps approaching the wall. After some time, he departed hastily, leaving me terrified until the police arrived. They discovered distinct shoe prints in the grass, but unfortunately, the trail led nowhere beyond the cemetery border. The man's bizarre behavior and request for assistance left me shaken and unsure of what to make of the incident. Despite my fear, I continued to work at the cemetery, and thankfully, nothing similar happened again. However, I doubt I'll ever feel comfortable falling asleep there ever again. My friends and I were never the brightest group, and we often engaged in foolish antics, such as venturing into abandoned areas and vacant homes. However, the worst thing we ever did was go into the cemetery one night. Despite our previous escapades having no consequences, this particular adventure turned out to be different. During our sophomore year of high school on a Friday night, my friends and I had no specific plans. We usually decided what to do on the spot. By midnight, a couple of friends had left due to tiredness, leaving just me and my friend, Dan. Although we weren't too tired ourselves, we didn't want to be bored at home either. Dan suggested exploring the cemetery near his house, thinking it would be spooky and thrilling. Having nothing better to do, I agreed without much thought, assuming it was just an ordinary cemetery. We took Dan's car and parked near his house, then walked to the cemetery's gate a few blocks away. The entrance had an imposing gateway, but the perimeter fence was a short wooden one. We effortlessly climbed over, and immediately felt a rush of adrenaline. The place was eerie, barely lit by a few dim lamps scattered around the graveyard. We didn't have a specific goal. We simply intended to walk through the place without getting scared and then leave. As we had walked past around 10 or 15 gravestones, Dan suddenly stopped, asking me to wait. In the distance, I could barely make out a figure standing beside one of the graves, walking toward us. Uncertain of what to do, we both hesitated, assuming we had been caught by a cemetery caretaker and might face consequences. The man stopped a few feet away from us, making it hard to see him clearly. "What are you two doing here?" he asked, nervously. Dan explained that we were merely exploring. The man replied that he would have to escort us out, and instructed us to follow him, leading us back in the direction he came from. Regret began to sink in, but we followed behind him, realizing we should have run away when we first spotted him. Under one of the standing lamps, our fear intensified as we noticed that the man's clothes were ragged, nothing like what a graveyard keeper would wear. He seemed more like a homeless person. Hearing us stop, he turned around and his face appeared unsettlingly crazy. In an angry tone, he motioned for us to come closer, but without thinking, Dan and I turned and ran, spurred on by adrenaline. The man's footsteps were close behind, and it felt like he might tackle us at any moment. We managed to jump the fence just in time. We heard him stop on the other side, and his frustrated punches against the wooden fence reinforced our conviction that we made a lucky escape. Upon returning home, we kept the encounter a secret from everyone, except our friends, aware of the illegal nature of our nighttime activities. Both of us are convinced that the man was likely a homeless individual attempting to rob or possibly harm us. Thankfully, we never made the mistake of going back to that place again. Around 10 years ago, when I was in my mid-30s, I worked as a security personnel at a cemetery located in a rather sketchy part of the city. Having someone on site 24/7 was necessary, due to occasional instances of people sneaking in to vandalize gravestones, or even attempting to dig up graves. Most of these incidents happened at night, but I was assigned to the evening shift, which ran from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. Although I still had to be alone for a couple of hours, between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m., I preferred it over the graveyard shift. On a particular day, I received a warning about a group of people sporadically visiting the cemetery and acting suspiciously. This had been happening for a few days, and my fellow workers were unsure of their intentions or identities. I was told to be vigilant. By 6 p.m., the other workers had left, leaving me to patrol the grounds alone. It was my favorite part of the shift, since I didn't have to constantly appear busy. The job mainly involved driving around in a golf cart and ensuring nothing unusual was happening. Between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m., I rode around the cemetery, picking up litter left by some visitors. As it approached 8:30 p.m., the last visitors departed, and I proceeded to lock the front gate. While securing the gate, I noticed a group of people on the other side of the road, seemingly observing me. Finished with the gate, I decided to park the cart where I could still keep an eye on them. The group consisted of 3 individuals, and they stayed in the same spot for a few minutes before walking away. As I drove around the cemetery, checking for any attempts to sneak in, I heard a sharp sound echoing through the field. Straining to see the source, I could not identify its exact location due to the darkness. Despite my concern, I continued driving through the cemetery and spotted 2 figures in the distance. Notably, it was not the same 3 individuals from earlier. As I approached them, they turned to face me without running away. I stopped the cart about 15 feet away and got out, warning them that the place closed at 8:30 p.m. and they needed to leave. Despite their nonchalant response, I noticed one of them holding a shovel, though they weren't near any graves. There was a dugout spot on the ground next to them. Suddenly, I heard a voice behind me, and the 2 figures ran in one direction, while the person behind me ran in another. I tried to chase one of them with the golf cart, but to my dismay, I discovered that both left tires had been slashed. I called the police and rushed to the main building, terrified by the group's suspicious actions. When the police arrived, the group had vanished, but they found a partially dug out hole and a body bag not far from the scene. To everyone's shock, there was a body inside the bag, and it later emerged that the deceased man was associated with a gang, and likely killed in a shooting. We speculated that the group had attempted to discreetly dispose of the body by burying it in the cemetery, hoping it would go unnoticed. Despite the intriguing plan, they executed it poorly, and none of the individuals in the group were ever identified or apprehended.